you. All set to go? Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good morning, everyone. We're starting over here this morning for something completely different. Before we start the meeting of the Community and Protective Services Committee, I would like to highlight a special milestone. Tomorrow, June 22nd, 2018, marks the 30th anniversary of the 911 service in the city of Ottawa. Demain, 22 juin 2018 sera le 30e anniversaire des services 911 à Ottawa. 30 years ago, Ottawa had 27 emergency phone numbers. Now, when a resident calls 911, the Communication Center directs their call to the appropriate emergency response service, be it police, fire, or paramedic. Consolidating those numbers into a single central emergency number with a coordinated response system has saved countless lives in our city. Since 1988, our 911 service has responded to more than 6 million calls. In 2017 alone, the service received more than 250,000 calls, or an average of 700 calls every day. Ottawa's 911 service has advanced over the years, continuing to provide world-class emergency response to our residents. Les services 911 à Ottawa ont évolué fil de temps. Ainsi, on dispose toujours de mesures d'intervention de classe mondiale pour venir en aide aux résidents. Ottawa's 911 service continues to evolve to meet the needs of our residents. In 2016, the city implemented text with 911 so that residents who are deaf, deafened, hard of hearing, or speech impaired could more easily contact 911. Text to 911 is a new, accessible method of contacting the 911 service. When a registered phone dials 911 on their cell phone, the Communication Center responds with a text message to address the emergency. The city will continue to work with the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission to enhance 911 system over the next decade. I would like to thank the city's Security and Emergency Management Branch, which oversees this critical service, and the Ottawa Police Services Communications Center, which operates the 911 Bureau on behalf of the city, for their important work over the past 3 decades. I would also like to recognize the more than 120 Communication Center employees. They work tirelessly every day to answer the emergency calls of our residents and to ensure they get the help they need. Lastly, I would like to recognize the Ottawa Fire Service and Ottawa Paramedic Service Communication Centers, which also provide emergency service coverage across the City of Ottawa. I would now like to invite Anthony DeMonte, the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services, along with Ottawa Police Service Superintendent Chris Rayoun and Inspector of the Communication Center Jim Alves, Acting Fire Chief Kim A. Ott, Paramedic Chief Miles Cassidy, and Manager of Security and Emergency Management Pierre Poirier to join me for a commemorative photo. Okay, good morning again, everyone, and welcome to the Community and Protective Services Committee for this first day of summer. We'll start with declarations of interest. Seeing none, confirmation of minutes 34 from May 17th, 2018. Okay. Item number 1, presentation, Ottawa Art Gallery, expansion and arts court redevelopment. There is a presentation, so we're going to hold that item and return to it. Item number 2, Crime Prevention Ottawa Annual Action Report 2017. Nancy Worsfeld is here to answer questions if there are any. Are there any? Yes, so we'll hold that item and return to it. Item number 3, commemorative naming proposal, Don Boudria Park. Carried? Item number 4, status update, Community and Protective Services Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending June 14th, 2018. Received? Item number 5, Housing Services Funding Allocation of Housing and Homeless Investment Plan, envelope number 4, Housing Benefits. Okay. Okay, there's questions, so we'll hold that and return to it. No, there's 2, I think totally 2. Item number 6, rooming house license bylaw review. Hold. Councillor Fleury is holding item number 6. Item number 7, donation of surplus stage. Carried? No, let's not debate it. Carried on item number 7. Okay, returning then to item number 1, the Ottawa Art Gallery expansion and arts court redevelopment. We have the pleasure of inviting Alexander Batsek and Lawson Hunter to come forward and do the presentation, and I hope all of you have had a chance to visit the new Ottawa Art Gallery. It's really an outstanding addition to the National Capital, and we're really proud of it, and I think they're going to tell us lots more about it. So thank you both for being here this morning. It's nice to see you at City Hall, and I'll turn the presentation over to the 2 of you.
Thank you so much. We're very pleased to be here, Madam Chair, to really talk about this exciting cultural build here in Ottawa. I'm going to start off a little bit with giving everyone the context, the broader context of the Ottawa Art Gallery. It is young as an art gallery compared to other art galleries across Canada. We're just celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. And it really emerged from a grassroots movement of artists and community leaders who believed in the need for its own institution to present and collect the art of our region in complement to all the wonderful national institutions here in Ottawa. From the beginning, when we were in Arts Court, we were one of the smallest art galleries in Canada, so we really did have a laundry list of needs that we needed to check off with our new build. We began that process in 2004 with a feasibility study, and then through 2008 to 2011, we kind of test drove different sites all across Ottawa. So we looked at the Canada and the World Pavilion, we looked at the Old Mill site, and then we spent a whole year at Lansdowne checking out different sites. So again, in 2012 is when we really ratified the decision to come back to Arts Court, to that site right next to Arts Court, and build something new. We did engage architect Mitch Hall from KP&B Architects to help with the functional design planning throughout this important stage. I'm going to pass it over to our former chair, Lawson Hunter, to then really go into the structure and the governance of the project as we move through into the expansion.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alex, for that introduction, and thank you, Councillor Deans, for the invitation to this committee. I'm just going to very quickly talk about the governance model that we put in place for this project and how successful I think it was as a model, and I hope the city will use it in other projects going forward. I think, in fact, you are using it on the library project as well. So I want to start by saying how excellent I thought our relationship was with the city throughout this, by and large. If we have time for questions, there are always room for some improvement, but generally I think it was a very, very successful project. I think the city deserves to be congratulated for the discipline they showed on the financial side of this all the way through. That had its anxieties for us from time to time, but that generally it worked very, very well. One of the things that I've said before, which I think was very important in the governance of this project, was the structure, the governance structure we put in place with the city, which basically treated us as partners in this project. We weren't simply stakeholders. We obviously had our own interests, as did the other tenants at Arts Court. And so we put a committee structure in place where a senior committee met quarterly. On a monthly basis, we were meeting with the more operational team. That committee structure was carried on throughout, and here's some examples of those meetings with the city's project management team, us and the architects and others. That structure allowed us to coordinate activities, respond to things that were happening on social media if they were. And by the way, I should say, we always ask sort of what are we picking up in the community? Are there concerns or complaints? And by and large, there were very, very few. It also was a method for us. It was a rather transparent process for us. Obviously, we weren't involved in all the legal shenanigans in drafting the contracts, etc., but other than the one we had ourselves with the city. But it was a way in which we had greater transparency, had an opportunity to ask questions. It was a way where we could resolve issues, and obviously try to keep track of timing as the project went forward. So overall, I just want to say I thought the committee structure, which we were involved in with the city in putting together, worked very, very well. This is the first 3P project for a visual arts institution in the country, and I think you should be very proud of the result. There were very few issues, and obviously at the end, if you have questions, we'd be delighted to try to answer them. Thank you.
Lawson is being modest, but I do want to point out that the Ottawa Art Gallery, under his leadership, launched one of the largest campaigns for a local arts institution, the Art Now campaign. We had a goal of 2.5, it went to 3.5, and then we did raise 5.3 million in the end under his and the community's great support and leadership and belief in the need to build the Ottawa Art Gallery. So I'm going to move right on to growing the institution, because of course, yes, we were building a building, but we were also growing the art gallery too. So we were moving from essentially 10,000 square feet in Arts Court to a radically new space, 55,000 square feet in a new building. So the OAG did develop a 5-year business plan. It was vetted by an independent assessor that the city appointed, and that really articulated our growth plan. We were able to embed $400,000 increase to base by the city in our 2020 action plan for arts, heritage, and culture, and I think that was a very important moment. Then the OEG board and staff really implemented a process of incremental growth based on our traditional base budget. And that was a process that really helped us year by year to slowly grow the institution, add staff, add revenue, add expenditure, so that by the time we came into the new building in 2018, we had the staff complement that we needed, and it wasn't sort of a major risk proposition for us. And I would say that the work that we did with the city on that growth plan was very, very important. So we did move over the last 5 years from 7 full-time equivalent staff to 21. And we also went from essentially a $1 million budget to double. So we have a $2 million budget. And that does not include security, maintenance, building life cycle, which of course is a city cost. So you just saw a quick little time-lapse video played of the building project. We did break ground in 2015 while we continued to work with the project team on the detailed design. And given the expert knowledge of the OAG staff, we were certainly heavily involved in the design process as well as the construction process. We engaged the Canadian Conservation Institute throughout this phase because eventually they are the body that will designate us as a Category A museum. And that's very important because that allows us to hold as well as to borrow works that have been deemed culturally significant to Canada. So that was very important. In fact, we that was a very new process for CCI, the Canadian Conservation Institute. They had never been with a museum from the very beginning to the very end. And in fact, they developed a museum checklist, which they had never had before, so that new galleries moving forward with construction will have this sort of base document that they can take throughout the design process and advocate for the specialized needs that a museum has. We will say that it was an ambitious project. We were, with many, many stakeholders, I think everybody knows, we physically linked to the OEG to Arts Court on 4 different levels, to the University of Ottawa and their theatre department on 3 levels, and to the hotel and condo on 1 level with a shared parking lot and a partially shared loading dock. Ultimately, the OAG really was able to achieve its laundry list of needs. We have significantly grown our collection storage, our exhibition space, our public programming spaces, as well as visitor amenity spaces like our Jackson Cafe and our Elma Duncan Hall and our gallery shop and 2 outdoor terraces. But more importantly, I suppose, the OAG finally had its front door and it's a proper profile within the city. So leading up to our inaugural opening, we had the following goals, and I think we really did manage to achieve them. So goal number 1 was to come out of the gate strong. We felt it was very important that we made a really great first impression. So with over 7,000 visitors on the opening weekend, 10,000 over the first week, and over 20,000 in the first month, I think we've accomplished that. We also had some great news coverage, lots of buzz on us, so articles the New York Times and the Globe and Mail. Goal number 2 was to merge as a cultural leader in Ottawa. So we wanted to do some new things here. We understood that we had a niche to fill, that we could be bold, that we could be inclusive and daring and exciting and really become a world-class destination. And I think we kept hearing that again and again over that opening weekend and obviously over the month that we had accomplished that. Goal number 3 was to celebrate the belief in Ottawa's art community. So not only did the Ottawa Art Gallery need to grow its institution, but it needed to prove that Ottawa has amazing art and has continued to have amazing art over 6,500 years within this region. So we did that with our inaugural exhibition that showed over 190 artworks, more than 180 artists, new commissions, and we also produced a groundbreaking publication that tells our story, our complex, our diverse story of art within this region. Goal number 4 was to be innovative and a thought leader. So again, we sort of feel that this is that niche that a municipal art gallery can fit into. The OEG is soft power, that we can talk about things like the importance of accessibility, that we are a participatory museum, and that of course we're free. And then we did need to achieve some revenue goals for the weekend, which we did, but more importantly, we met a whole bunch of new friends. So I'm going to leave us on a little bit of a video that was about our opening weekend, really to just showcase, I don't know, just the excitement that was in the air for growing the OEG. Perhaps I'll add, as we're watching this, that we worked very closely with the Anishinaabe on both sides of the river as we were moving forward. So not only did they help us with our inaugural exhibition, and in fact they picked one of the main titles for it, but we also created in concert with them a declaration of territory that is in our main lobby. And so as we move towards the end of this video, I really do encourage everyone to come out and enjoy the Ottawa Art Gallery. It is your Ottawa Art Gallery. That's extremely important for us to get that message across. It was built so that it is a place where you can come and enjoy and commune with the art of your region. So thank you very much for having us today.
And it's free, as the mayor keeps saying.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for the presentation, and congratulations on an amazing project. And it's really nice to hear that the governance structure works so well, especially since we're going to be using it again on the library project. So I think that's great. There is a question for you, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Congratulations on a successful opening. I have not yet had the opportunity to come since the relocation, but it's definitely on my to-do list, and with a wet weekend forecast, this may be the ideal weekend to do that with my two daughters. Can you remind me how you are financed? Where do your revenues come from?
So it's a combination of a few different things. We get about 33%, 37% when you include the Firestone funding that we receive from the city. And then, of course, we receive funding from the federal government through the Canada Council and the Ontario Arts Council. We also have our own income generators through endowments and various things like that. Of course, we have a gallery shop, a cafe, and art rentals that provide some of the self-generated revenue. We do significant fundraising as well, which represents about 21% of our income. And yeah, I guess that sort of wraps. That's generally where we get our funds from.
Thank you. I'm just looking at museum attendance stats within the capital region. They're not last year's, but a few years ago. They're pretty solid. The Museum of History has over 1 million visitors, and the other War Museum, Museum of Nature, have about half of that. You're a free art gallery, which should be a great incentive for people to come. How are you getting the word out to the people of Ottawa and tourists who come here that you now exist at this location?
Thank you very much. It was certainly a big part of our kickoff as we were leading towards the inaugural exhibition to build up as much excitement as possible. So we significantly increased not only the news coverage, but also all of our social media channels went up significantly during that period of time, and those become very key to getting the word out, certainly. We have been working very closely with Ottawa Tourism as well to create fam tours with various tourism groups, as well as various external media from, I gave a delegation from China a tour the other day. So that was certainly a big part of it. We will be conducting our own meet and greets with the various tourist industry people so that they really can embrace this and make sure that all of their guests know that we're there and we're available and we're open. And that's another thing that we should point out. We are open 9 to 9, 7 days a week, and that's very unusual for museums. And we did that very purposely because we want to be open when people need us to be open.
Excellent. My last question is still along those lines, and there are a number of economically challenged neighborhoods in Ottawa where residents in those neighborhoods don't have the same type of opportunities or exposure to sporting or cultural events such as what you're offering at the gallery. How can we work together to ensure that these residents of our great city have that opportunity to come?
Well, thank you so much for that question. It's an excellent question, one that we care very much about. So in the short term, we've made strategic relationships with the Ottawa Mission and St. Jude's so that we make sure that they're involved. We have a key partnership with the Royal Ottawa Hospital and the Mental Health Department. And all of our school and group tours are free. So I think with the LRT LRT and with more nodes that can get people to our space, it's certainly going to help. But we would love to be able to work with each councillor in their ward and come up with strategies to help that process along.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Fleury. I don't know if you get wrap up, but we'll put you on it. Councillor Nisbet.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. It was great to hear, and you're off to a great start. I did have the pleasure of attending your opening night, and I thought it was a wonderful evening. My first introduction to the Ottawa Art Gallery many, many years ago, shortly after I moved to Ottawa, was your rental program. So I came into the site and rented artwork for a time, and eventually actually repurchased one of them. And I'm just curious if that program is something you're continuing, and what's happening to that. Is it expanding in the new space, staying the same? Is it an important revenue tool for you?
Yes, absolutely. We do continue. It's now called the Annex Gallery, and so that allows us to showcase works that are for sale or for rent. We put out a call as we were heading towards the opening for a new group of artists to come through. That is the process that we use. And the artwork is being stored on location, and then we are using digital tools more and more to be able to showcase that inventory. We worked with Shopify as the platform to be able to deliver that online. But of course, on site, we always have our wonderful attendants to showcase the works that we do have in that inventory. So yes, we still rely on it. It's still an important part of our revenue generating, but also it's a great way to introduce new artists to new collectors.
Agreed. Yeah, and then my final comment, I guess, is just that I think your policy and your approach of keeping admission free is so important, and I hope that serves as a model to other museums and galleries across the city and country, because in terms of your goals of equity and accessibility and creating a love of art throughout the population, I think it's an excellent approach. So thank you for the great work you did, and good luck moving ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nisbet. Councillor Eglai.
Yeah, again, mine is more of a comment. As the parent of a visual artist, I want to say thank you, and as a councillor, I want to say thank you, because I think what this does for the work that your team has done, I think what this says to the arts community, all the working artists out there, it says you are part of the city, and you are part of city building, more importantly, because I think what you've done in conjunction with city staff is you've created a real hub. It's you've got the connections to the university and to the mission and to the hotel and to the condo, and you're on the LRT, and so you created a real hub there, and so I think this is just the beginning. I think it's only going to get bigger and better. The shows are going to get more exciting, and one of the things that I really enjoyed seeing when I went to the opening, and this sort of builds on one of the earlier comments made by the councillors, is how many people, and I have represent a suburban ward, how many people from my ward were out at the event, and not just visiting, but were part of it. Your drummer during the dance sequence was from my ward, and it was great to see him out there and doing that, and the sense that I got from the project was it's very much about the city. It's not about the core, it's not about downtown, it's accessible to everybody and it's open to everyone, and I'm really excited to hear about wanting to work with individual councillors to continue that outreach throughout the whole city. So again, thank you very much to the whole team.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eglai. Councillor Fleury.
If you're listening on the system, you probably heard big winds. It's Councillor Eglai didn't take a deep breath. It was the snowbirds that flew over the memorial cenotaph on Ogden Street. A couple of things. Obviously, I'm very fortunate that the Ottawa Art Gallery and Arts Court renovations of the spaces in my area. Certainly has been a pleasure to work with both Alex and Lawson over the many years now. It's exciting. I'm pleased to see that there's over 22,000 visitors that came the first month. I really hope that we can keep that up and incentivize folks in all of our communities. As councillors, you go into the barbecue summers and obviously a busy fall, but ahead of that you might have your last newsletter, one of. Please make sure to make reference, as there are local artists across the city that are in your ward, and it is a free space. There's also, as a young parent, there is daycare, I think, on Thursday evening? Wednesdays. So that's another unique things. And I was on the site over Father's Day weekend, and there was yoga. So, there's something for everyone at that location. It's very accessible. It'll be a 2-minute walk away from the future light rail station when it opens later in the fall. And for us, it's extraordinary. And one of our challenges, and I think Councillor Eglai touched on it, and Lawson and Alex posed that challenge to me, is really to work with each councillors and identifying artists in their community, which they know about, which we can feature, do special features at the Ottawa Art Gallery, and bring Stittsville residents into the gallery with the artists from Stittsville and having that opportunity. So we'll work towards that initiative to expand the connection with various parts of the city.
Okay, well, I think you can see we're all very excited about the Ottawa Art Gallery, and I think it poses great opportunity for this community for the future, and I think it's in very good hands. And Lawson, we're sorry to see you leave the board, but we have no doubt that you have another project up your sleeve, and I'm sure we're going to hear about it very soon. So thank you both for being here this morning. I know you do. So thank you both for being here. So received on the item? Okay, item number 2, Crime Prevention Ottawa Annual Action Report. Who had that? Councillor Brockington.
You want to go straight into questions? Okay. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Worsfold, and to Chair Kadri. I have read the report, and thank you for the work of Crime Prevention Ottawa over the last year and your continued efforts on many fronts. As you know, first of all, I want to thank you as well for coming out to, you and your team coming out to various River Ward events over the last year. I have held now, I think, 15 community safety nights this term of council, and Crime Prevention Ottawa has been a key participant in those safety nights, so I wanted to acknowledge your work in that regard as well. My question is based on the increasing trend of shootings in this city, some of the violent behaviors that we're seeing in the city. Again, there was a shooting last night in my ward that I've just found out about, and one of your main strategies is street violence, the gang strategy, and I've been listening to a number of experts in Toronto talk about their significant upward trends in shootings, violent incidents, the fact that this year they'll probably smash a record. Ottawa's trend is looking to break a shooting record as well. Is the current strategy working? Are there new initiatives that the CPO is looking at that could be part of our budget discussion early next year? What are your thoughts on what other ways the city can be looking at in particular gang violence, but shootings as well?
Thank you, Councillor, for the chair, and I would take the opportunity to thank our volunteer ambassadors who've been very present at your meetings, as well as members of CPO staff. We are acutely aware of the change that has happened in a number of cities across Canada. This March, our board received a research paper that we had engaged the Conference Board of Canada to do to look at the increase in weapons-related crime in Ottawa. It's available on our website. And it does appear to be a trend both in Ottawa and across Canada. There are many different people trying to look at what is going on. And when you may recall that we presented the evaluation of the first iteration of the street violence and gang strategy to this committee in October of 2016. At that time, we could show improvements with regards to individuals, with regards to the individual programs that they were involved in. But the overall trend is difficult. So we did, as noted in our report this year, we did an extensive public consultation through 2017 and released, presented to our board, which approved in October, the renewed street violence and gang strategy, which is also available on our website. In that renewed street violence and gang strategy, we identified some key components that are of concern, and we are seeking to ensure that we base all of our actions on good research, because as you may have heard from the pieces that you've been hearing on the news, is there is some confusion as to why we are seeing these increases in weapons-related crime. One of the major challenges which is being identified in the community is the perception of a culture change, a kind of normalization among some young adults and young people of the presence of weapons and carrying weapons. And with the developing brain, with the reality of impulsivity and youth, people who have knives, or even worse, firearms in their pockets, are simply more likely to escalate to deadly violence over what appears to often be truly minor disputes. We're very concerned about that, and we are researching an evidence-based approach to that culture change, if we can establish that that culture change has in fact taken place. We are concerned about that. We also identified through the consultation a concern about the generalization of a kind of a low-level violence and harassment in some neighborhoods. And by the end of this month, we will be releasing a very small call for proposals for creative attempts to address the kind of incivility that happens in some neighborhoods from a creative point of view, because it's not clear that an enforcement approach will work. Senior levels of government are also very concerned about that, the issue. And one of the issues that was identified in our consultation with regards to the street violence and gang strategy was the absence of culturally appropriate mentors and role models. The Ontario government identified the same question in their consultation for the Ontario Black Youth Action Plan, and they've recently funded 4 new programs here in Ottawa, and we are working closely with those programs to assure alignment and to support them in their work. And the federal government has recently released a call for proposals, and we are assisting agencies in town to apply for that with the National Crime Prevention Center, like the federal pocket of money, which we will assist agencies in that application. So, yes, we're concerned.
Okay, thank you, and I really appreciate that answer. My final question, Madam Chair, is next week Council will debate the addition of 10 police officers through an investment Public Safety Canada is making across Canada. Have you been asked yet about that sort of a reactive investment, police officers? What about the programs such as CPO that exist? Have you been asked yet for your funding needs that the cities ask will be, eventually the City of Ottawa will have to enumerate its list of needs, policing as one of many, but have you been part of any preliminary discussions yet?
My understanding is that the budget process for 2019 is a later process because it will take place later in the year, so we have not yet been in those discussions, but it was certainly a topic of discussion at the Board of Directors table in the past months, yes.
So if I can just add a couple of things to your question, Councillor Brockington. First of all, thank you for the question. In terms of your last question about the participation in that funding that is coming down the pipe, we have not been approached properly.
officially as of yet, although we do work with the OPS on a regular basis, and they themselves also have a CPO program within their own organization that they work with us on. So we will collaborate with them, but not to say that we haven't already worked with them on the issue, except the funding part of it. Okay? Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Caudry and to Nancy for the report. I instinctively think the work that you do is very important because I'm a believer in the expression that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and I empathize with the acknowledgement in your results-based framework that sometimes it's hard to measure the impact because prevention is you can't measure, as you know, what didn't happen. I guess my question is, while instinctively I think the work you do is very important, and my gut says, maybe we should be thinking about how to give you greater license and how to increase perhaps the scale and the efficacy of your work. Would there be a way, are you aware of any studies done elsewhere that have been able to try and quantify, maybe in a municipality that didn't have such an agency, and then through the introduction and longitudinally they looked at different crime rates. But how do we help you make the case for the importance of prevention in this area? Are there ways in which you're aware that statistically or quantifiably we can help you what seems to be an instinctive and a very obvious need to focus on the prevention side? But are there ways in which we can help tell that story to the wider public?
We've used a results-based accountability framework because we are constantly attempting to roll together many different projects and different streams of work, because we do work on the gender-based violence, on neighborhoods, and on youth-associated crime. In any one of those projects, I can demonstrate specific results, but if you're looking for an overall, I have not seen that done with regards to a broad-based strategy. I think that there are, in the academic literature, they'll talk about different approaches of whole countries. And how a whole country does better on some things than others. Again, because this is an issue which is the responsibility of multiple levels of government. But I would be very happy to talk further about how to do that better.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking, I'm very much in the same mind frame as Councillor Brockington, anticipating a discussion at Council next week. What I'm starting to think about is if you take the spectrum, if you think about this as a very important upstream intervention, how do we start to think about and quantify how additional investments in crime prevention are best managed? What is the right ratio of upstream and downstream interventions? And I think that's a very critical question, not just for next week, but broadly speaking.
Yes.
And what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out if there are certain pieces of research or evidence that would help me in knowing how I'm going to approach this issue next week, and again, broadly speaking.
I believe Councillor Caudry wishes.
I'll just add to what Nancy has already responded to Councillor Nussbaum. The issue, or not the issue, but the item that we deal with on a daily basis is that fluidity in terms of the criminal programs, or not program, but criminal activity in the city. For example, as Nancy mentioned earlier in response to Councillor Brockington, about today's youth or today's population is very easily accessing the tools that they need to create, to commit the crime, i.e. knives or firearm. So that fluidity in terms of their process is what makes our task of prevention a little bit more difficult. And I know that's not your question. The question is, how do you help us in terms of research-based thinking to see where we can go with that? And we do work with our partners not only in the city, but also across the province that have experience in those kind of situations and see what they're doing differently than what we are doing currently. The other thing is for us is to get them, as you mentioned, we get our message out, which we try to do on a weekly basis. We share more information with the councillors sitting on the table to say, look, here's what the crime prevention is doing, and what we need you ladies and gentlemen to do is to forward that information to your residents and say that there is an office or a department like Crime Prevention Ottawa that can help the community, and that is our mandate, to go out to those neighborhoods and to those communities, especially vulnerable areas in the city, to make sure that our message is getting out there. And you know, with the Councillor Tierney's ward, with the crisis a year ago with Jasmine Crescent, the incident happened. People, walk away from the incident thinking, it's terrible and so on and so forth. For us, it's important to bring them back out into the neighborhood and tell them what other services are available for them to rely on. And that's that messaging that's very important to get back into the community through our partners as well as through the CPO.
And I would note, I absolutely welcome the openness to increased budget requests.
Okay, is that it, Councillor? Councillor Egley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Councillor Caudry. The work you do is very important because, again, it's not all about enforcement, as we're hearing. The report has set out the good things that you've done over the last year or so. Sort of in line with what my colleagues have been asking around upcoming budget and that sort of thing. What sort of programs can we expect going into the new year? More of the same, which is all good, don't get me wrong, or there's some new initiatives that you're looking to bring forward for our consideration and for our funding?
The major change, and which we have discussed extensively at the board, and which we were assuming that all remains as it is, that we were intending to bring forward with regards to an increased budget request, is in the context of the Safer Ontario's Act, which was adopted by the provincial government this spring. There is a requirement upon municipalities to do collaborative community safety and well-being planning. Our board has discussed that, and we've discussed that with various parties within the police and the city, and we want to take that opportunity to do a broader-based approach to community safety and well-being, and to seek to align our work with the many other wonderful pieces of work that the city as a whole does, and also with the community. And within the legislation, there is direction with regards to aligning some of the big provincial investments with notably a specific request that the LIN be in participation, given that so much of the activity of concern is driven by substance abuse and mental health challenges. I think it's very important that the health partners be involved in these questions.
So, well, you're in a unique position with Councillor Caudry in terms of opening the doors for those discussions with the health community.
Yes.
But can you give us sort of a more concrete example of what this program might look like? What, in terms of, like, what would be a collaborative initiative that you might be considering going forward with? And who would be the partners other than health in that collaboration?
The legislation designates health, mental health, schools, child protection. Almost everybody who is designated in the legislation is already a part of the board of Crime Prevention Ottawa. The new addition, when we approach them, as is designated in the Act, is the LIN. So it's all of the partners that we have been working with, the community agencies, and the representative has been Michael Allen from the United Way, the city, police, child protection, schools, and so on. The kinds of initiatives, if we are to do a broad-based and open consultation, I'm not sure I should be identifying the end result of that at this point, but I believe I can imagine many, many interesting possibilities within that. I'm at a loss our approach has been to go to the community and consult to see what their priorities are, okay, and not to presuppose the answers to their questions.
Okay, fair. Just if I can add something to it, Councillor, is the fact that, working with the mental health piece, that is becoming a key piece for us in terms of how do we handle that. And that's where the working with LIN or working with the OPH will come in and will benefit. And one of those pieces, not just with public health, but also with planning. For example, the SEPTED studies that are done after the fact. We want those studies to be done when the community is being planned, and see how we can get those pieces of SEPTED studies into the planning aspect in terms of moving forward. Building better communities is what it comes down to in terms of SEPTED studies. In terms of the public health piece, which is Champlain LIN or LIN that we're working with, the discussions has started, but where that discussion is going to lead, we're still working on that based on the act that the province is telling us to do or follow.
Okay, last quick question. So in terms of the prevention enforcement discussion or balance that we've been talking about, how would you describe your relationship with the police in that regard? Do they seek out your assistance in addressing problems like Councillor Brockington's, for example, in certain of his communities, or do you go to them? Do they go to you? How does that relationship work?
Well, the chief sits on our board as Ottawa Police Chief. So based on not only on that, but other partnerships that we worked with over the years with Ottawa Police, they're an active participant in our program, as well as we parts of their program when they need our assistance in terms of crime prevention part of it.
And are there ways that relationship could be enhanced?
I feel that we have we have so many different partnerships with the police. You would be bored if I told you about all of them, but I would want to note perhaps the most creative partnership that we have is through the Time for Change initiative, which is the gang intervention program, yes, to assist individuals to change their behavior. We actually have a social worker embedded part-time with the Guns and Gangs unit, which allows for immediate officer service and referrals at points in an individual's life when they are most likely to change their behavior. So in their interactions with the criminal justice system, their interactions with the hospital if they are injured, and so on. We are looking at all of those opportunities and seeking to seize those moments so that we can make an offer of service so that they will choose to change their life. And that opportunity is facilitated by the deep level of partnership and the memorandum of understanding we've been able to achieve.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I think this was a really interesting discussion and probably a precursor. I'm glad you held it too. I think it's a real precursor of what's perhaps to come at City Council next week. But for my part, I just want to say that I think the work Crime Prevention Ottawa is doing is very important and necessary, and I'm sure that you could use more resources to do that work. Having said that, I also think it's important to recognize that the Ottawa Police Service is one of the most under-resourced police services in the province, and we have had a lot of escalation of violent crime in the community, and we need to address that head-on too. So I'm not sure it's an either-or proposition that I would be looking at moving into next week's discussion. So thank you for being here this morning. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, if I can just add one more comment to it. The question that Councillor Aguilar asked about partnership with the police. We have a very strong partnership with the police,
yes.
Not only from crime prevention program perspective, but even with other partners in the community, like John Howard Society, for example, through the Guns and Gangs. So we do have some strong partnerships. In terms of, each partnership has its own mandate also, working with CPO and working with within their own organization. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Worthfield. Received on the item? Okay, thank you. Item number 5, Housing Services Funding Allocation of Housing and Homelessness Investment Plan, envelope number 4, Housing Benefits. Councillor Nussbaum. Yes, it's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question was related to what I think I understand to be a suggestion in the report that the envelope, one of the reasons why delegated authority is being sought is that staff believe that there needs to be flexibility in perhaps shifting funding from rent supplements to the allowance envelope, which I understand the rationale, but I guess I'm just trying to understand a little bit the impact of that. And what I was just thinking about is if you're, an average family needing a 3-bedroom apartment or home of some kind, what would the average price in Ottawa would probably be what, $1,500 or $1,600 or somewhere in there, and so the rent supplement means, well, you're not paying more than of your income on that, so that could end up that you're getting a fairly significant supplement, whereas the allowance would give you the $250. So I guess what I'm getting at is, wouldn't this mean that in some cases, in situations that the housing allowance, while you can sprinkle it perhaps among a wider group of recipients, doesn't provide quite the same benefit? And so how do we think through that, yes, we're dealing with a shortage in apartments, but is this going to mean that more people are not going to get quite the financial help that they need, or is it a good thing that we're sprinkling those allowances more broadly?
Madam Chair, in response to the question, we are having significant issues right now in securing rent supplement units to actually provide rent supplement funding to people where they're only paying 30% of their income. The market has tightened up significantly. The vacancy rate has reduced to 1.7, and it's even lower for townhomes. So we want to make sure that the money continues to flow to people and that they can, go out in the private market and try and find affordability for themselves. Our housing allowance is also a tiered housing allowance benefit, so it's $250 for the first family member and then $50 for each additional family member. So it's not just the base $250. We're continuing to reach out to our rent supplement landlords and also trying to form new partnerships so that we can provide that deeper affordability to people. But in the absence of that, we wanted to make sure that we're continuing to keep the money flowing and also continue to provide choice and portability for people.
So did staff consider the possibility or the pros and cons of raising the housing allowance so that, for instance, if someone were under a rent supplement to get the equivalent of $1,000 a month as a supplement versus a housing allowance with 3 children would be whatever, $400 or $450, was consideration given to that, given that that might be a direction that you need to move?
So those are certainly, Madam Chair, so those are certainly conversations that we're entertaining internally right now. In terms of our rent supplement funding, I'll address that first. We have to use average market rents as set by CMHC, and we have to go out, actually back out to the province to ask for permission to look for rents that are above and beyond that. In terms of the housing benefit, it's the tiered benefits. We would need to come back to council with a report to ask for permission to re-look at the amount of benefit that we offer. It's something that we will look at over the course of this coming year as we do a midpoint review of our 10-year housing and homelessness plan. But by raising the housing allowance benefit and raising the rent supplement benefit and going above and beyond the average market rent, we will ultimately help less people overall.
You know, I appreciate there's absolutely that balance. It's more a question of, is it fair to say that in a majority of the rent supplement is going to be more generous than a housing allowance?
Madam Chair, yes, that is accurate.
So there will be an impact in terms of, I mean, by virtue of you signaling that you're moving in this direction, we're moving from a situation where we'll be helping out more people, but with less of a subsidy. Is that a fair summary?
That is correct.
Right. So all I'm saying is that has implications, and I'm glad to hear that that's something that you'll revisit in the mid-year term, because yeah, we have to understand whether that's the right policy approach. So this is, we're going ahead doing this, but it's going to be important for us to evaluate the impact of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I think I'm okay with this change, with these changes. So could you, so in what it spoke about was since 2014 we have 3,236 units, but it doesn't speak to the amount of people. And were those intertwined, or were those, is it reflective of 1 per 1 or 1 unit per person?
Madam Chair, so the 3,236 number you're referencing is the overall investment we have in rent supplements across all of our programs. Mm-hmm. This particular report is only asking permission for the municipal funding within the Housing and Homelessness Investment Plan to look at it as one and not box ourselves in arbitrarily, so that we can continue to keep the money flowing.
So I'm good with that. I'm curious though, because we regularly get private landlords who have rental units who come to us, and then we share that information with the branch and saying, have we done a process by which there's a formal request of expression of interest or a procurement component for private landlords? Because it does feel like we're always dealing with the same landlords and the same type of build form. So how is that done historically, and are we looking to?
Madam Chair, no, we have not done a procurement process or an expression of interest to try and secure additional private market landlords. Our housing officers through the rent supplement program are, however, leveraging all of our industry contacts, reaching out to our current ones. We have the housing locator program, Salvation Army, which also is out there, meeting new landlords, and we're sharing that information back and forth with the rent supplement unit. So the vacancy rate is very tight, rents are high, and many of our landlords that we're reaching into, there's waiting lists for even 3-bedroom apartments in the city, let alone townhouse units.
Yeah. Look, I recognize there's some vacancy issues, but I do think that there's landlords out there that have units, vacant ones, that aren't traditionally the ones that the department has worked with. So my question to you, Madam Chair, is how would it be best to ensure that we, I'm not, procurement is one thing. I'm just saying that we publicly put out there in an expression of interest, if someone has, unit XYZ in the price range XYZ, please be in touch at this contact of the city, and that we promote it. Because right now you have private landlords who have generally what we'll call market rent, who we could, what I often call rent supplements, the housing benefits, and they're not engaged. So we only have the same type of landlords, and there's some, in my mind, this is my perception, there's some issues relating to competitivity and the maintenance of those units over time. Maybe not in a snapshot, but over time, if we're always dealing with the same landlords who feel that they get support from the city, we're creating a different challenge. So I'd love for us to be public, be open, be transparent, for an opportunity for our private landlords.
Madam Chair, we have great contacts with ELO, the Eastern Ontario Landlords Organization, and we could go out there to one of their next meetings and again try and recruit other landlords who may not traditionally partner with us in a rent supplement program.
Okay. Is there any way we can do it? So I appreciate you're always hands-on and you go, and that's great. But from a public point of view, resident who might not have a private landlord but might have different contacts, that we use the City of Ottawa's official communication channels to inform private landlords of this opportunity and this interest to engage with the city.
Madam Chair, we can certainly explore that with our own communications branch.
Thank you.
I think we'll just take that as a direction to staff to do that. Okay? Okay, Councillor, anything else? Okay, anyone else received on the report? Thank you. Item number 6, Rooming House Licensing Bylaw Review, Councillor Fleury.
So I don't know if we can get staff that are overseeing the review to join us. Okay, so my questions are less so on the report relating to rooming houses, but on the review that staff there's an ongoing review that's coming. It does attach to the rooming house component, Madam Chair, and I did speak to the General Manager of Emergency Services. I have a couple of directions to staff, and I wanted to bring them to the floor with the context, but just for the purpose of this report, which I think is important, there was great collaboration with the planning branch of the city and the operational side with the bylaw teams. Always kept having trouble with the city of which definition are we talking about. Housing had a rooming house definition, fire had a rooming house definition, bylaw had a rooming house definition, and zoning had a bylaw definition. So maybe just for the record, Roger, maybe you can confirm that now as a city we have one common approach to what is a rooming house?
Madam Chair, yes, that's correct. The only exception would be fire. So fire remains to be more than 4 rooms. So we have no authority at this point to amend fire code. So
that's under their code. Is that correct?
Correct.
But under our city's authority, everything is under one definition.
Madam Chair, that's correct.
Excellent. So on the rooming house component, you brought forward this report. I think you'll get, it's clear. I don't anticipate any issues. Now we're going forward with your team is doing a full review, and you're planning to come back to CPS, I believe, in 2019 with some recommendations on rooming houses and licensing.
Madam Chair, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. So not to influence the review, because I know that staff had gone out to do tendering and so on, and I respect that process. I think it's important that that element is in play. But at the same time, we can amend and review our license powers within what we're asking. So I wanted to bring to the floor a couple of issues that I've come up recently. I know, Roger, you're aware of them, but I think it's important for me to bring them forward and also get them as direction to staff to be included as part of the overall review, not as part of the consultant's review. First one being, right now there appears to be in the licensing criteria, There are no separation distances, there are no physical limits to the amount of rooming houses in a ward. So without prejudice, I'd love for your team to, as part of the licensing review, consider what those impacts are and what could be added to the licensing within your authorities to have a reflection on what is our goal relating to that. So, Madam Chair, I don't know if I could ask, just in terms of tracking for this, if we could be, if the minutes, or if the minutes of this meeting can reflect my direction to staff on that item. Then, having visited a lot of the rooming houses, and this is, again, not your fault, but I want to make sure that we put these going forward, that we put some ratios. So I'll start with the easy one, which is, in my mind, we have not defined what a kitchen includes. So making sure that in every kitchen that there's the basics of what you have in a kitchen: a stove, a working refrigerator, a sink. I think that dishes, cutlery, some of those basic things that we actually should put in the license to ensure that those who live in rooming houses have the ability to make food where they live. So that to me is of high importance. And then continuing on that path, as we know, there's a lot of people that live in rooming houses that we establish, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but a ratio of washrooms to people and toilets to people. Because right now in some of those areas, it's very limited as to what we have, and in my mind, it's quite problematic.
Okay, Councillor, I understand your point, and I think if your direction is to ask staff to think about those things,
absolutely,
consider them, they can think about them and consider them, but I wouldn't take a direction directing them to put that in a bylaw at this point. They have to do their work.
No, but I'd love when they come back to report on these items to say what they plan to do or why they're not proceeding with steps.
Chair, if I may, the councillor, we did have a discussion yesterday, and the team's more than willing. I know we're getting into the technical weeds here, but we're more than willing to ensure that when we do our review, that those items are reviewed and they will be reported back.
And then I have just a few more, Madam Chair, on the same vein of ideas. Same concept. We have regulations for shelter and for, I use the province, the minimum space for a room as in jail. So in my mind, in our licenses, we should have the same relating to the minimum space of what is a bedroom. So again, if you can pursue that as part of the review. And finally, there are specific issues relating to solid waste management out of those properties. To ensure that as part of our license that all rooming houses are forced to have private pickup. And that in my mind should be all packaged in the licenses. I recognize that some existing licenses would not comply with what I'm asking, but that's why as part of the review, if you can consider the limitations or the effectiveness or the, and I'd be glad to meet with you at your convenience. We've gone and visited rooming house, so you know that I'm privy to some of the feedback from the tenants relating to those matters, and there's been a lot of work, especially in Centertown, in Councillor McKinney's ward, with staff on a lot of the rooming houses, and some of these are part of the recommendations. So I wanted to bring them to the floor of committee so that staff actually appropriately review it as part of the licensing process. And yeah, I think that sort of summarizes my range of interest as part of the licensing review.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fleury. Councillor Schwelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, for the benefit of anybody who may be listening to this either at home or on recording in the future, just wanted to get on the record that the issues that concern our ward, like Airbnb and like room rental within residences, are addressed properly in the go forward on this report, because staff have incorporated a harmonized set of definitions, harmonized with the newly passed R4 report. And so that is going to, by definition with this, the previous R4 report and what comes forward from consultants a little bit later on is going to form a new ability to enforce our law and to keep our laws very clear. So I just want to make sure people understand that that's in this report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Schrader. Anyone else? So carried on the report? Carried. With the directions. Okay, notices of motion for consideration of subsequent meetings. Seeing none, inquiries? Adjourned. Yeah, go figure.